Hello and welcome to Legal Bites. If you're new here, my name is Alita. I'm a lawyer licensed in California and DC, and on this channel, we explain the law one bite at a time. We don't give legal advice, but we do talk about how the law works and try to look into our crystal ball to see how things might turn out. If you're enjoying this on YouTube, we'd love it if you could like the video, subscribe to the channel, share it with friends, all the great YouTube-y stuff. And if you want to listen while out and about, we're now offering our live streams in podcast form where you can leave a rating and review. Links are in the description below, as well as to our clips channel where you can find some of the best clips taken from our live streams. Otherwise, if you want to catch me elsewhere, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And if you want to support the channel, you can do so on Locals, Patreon, or by becoming a YouTube member, or by buying some really awesome Legal Bites merch. Again, all links are in the description below. And with that said, let's get into it. Hello. Happy Thursday. Happy December. It's officially December. You guys can officially start your Advent calendars if you celebrate and if you partake. We don't have Advent calendars this year in our household. I don't know why. We probably should. We should fix that, shouldn't we? I think we should. I will tell Mr. Bites that we need to get right on that. Anyway, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I hope you're having a good Thursday and a good week so far. And if it's not going so great, I hope it goes better. So there is someone who is having a much better week than they were having earlier this week. And that is Danny Masterson. So of course, that is the subject of today's live stream. We're talking about the Danny Masterson trial. We've been covering it since day one, not on a daily basis, but a couple times a week, pretty much. Following along a lot with Tony Ortega's detailed notes from inside the courtroom and other reporting on it and whatnot. And I think I'm not gonna lie, I was a little bit surprised to see a mistrial happen, at the very least at this point. I would have thought that it would have taken longer for them to get to a mistrial. So I was a little bit surprised. But I guess, in the end, I mean, the fact that they actually did come to a mistrial, I guess, shouldn't be that shocking. And we'll get into the reasons why I think so. We'll get into that. But first, let's say hi to folks in the chat. Where are people coming in from? We've got Tracy. Good morning from Grafton, New York. Good morning, Tracy. We've got Living Life With and Singing Songs with Mallory. Hello from cold Utah. We did end up getting snow that one day. There's still some on the ground, but not much. All right. Happy snow time. Brittany Chanel, good morning from Illinois. Good morning. Jessica, good morning from cold, gloomy northern New Jersey. Good morning. Has 01, good morning from Alberta, Canada. So looking forward to your thoughts on the mistrial. Well, we will definitely be getting into it for sure. Camille Crosswell, good morning from Raleigh, North Carolina. We've got Jennifer Starks. Good morning from OKC. Welcome to the 25-day countdown to Christmas. Yes, welcome. Let's see here. We've got Satan's OH Cult from Wisconsin. Welcome. Good morning from Northern Nevada, says Kim Farnham. Uncle Bubba says Akron, Ohio. Lucy Buzz TV, Los Angeles, California. Interlocution, good morning from Arizona. All right, good morning. Michaela, hi from Scandinavia. Hello. Julia says hello from Ohio. W. Prophet hi from San Diego. I've got Debo 1982 from Virginia. We've got Spetty Ross from Massachusetts. Robbie Dobby from a wet and windy Nova Scotia. Pranav Oja from India. Love it. Love to see it. Let's see. Ashley Disaster from North Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Brittany Joe Chamberlain from Portland, Oregon. A bit of snow expected today. Ooh, all right. Hopefully you are keeping nice and warm. But I guess Sandy Dorsey Couchin doesn't have to worry about that because she's coming in from sunny Florida. All right. And Aaron H. from Orlando. Let's see. Giggity from Michigan. Hello. Keith Gregory in Kentucky. Night Eyes in the UK. Hope you feel better for some rest. Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's, I don't know what it is about it, but sometimes, in some weeks we're just like charging through the week, full speed ahead. And then we get to Friday and we're like, oh, wait, That's crazy. It's actually Friday. But then some weeks we're just kind of hobbling along. And I feel like for me personally, that's been like this week for me. I don't know if it's just because it's like coming off of the holiday weekend, maybe because I was traveling over the weekend, but there's something about this week that I was just like, all right, we're taking it one step at a time, one day at a time. We'll get there. Let's see, Cowpoke in West Virginia. We've got Mo B from Ireland. Hello, hello. We've got B coming in from Germany. Happy December from Germany. Yay, good. And then we've got Sarah Frickberg or Freiberg from very dark Sweden. Oh my gosh. I hope you have a good UV light at home to give you some kind of UV rays, right? Shannon White from a frosty, crisp Texas morning, and Joan from Edinburgh. Oh, I love it, love it, love it. And let's see, Stuck on Strings from New Orleans. Good to see you. Shibaka Wiki from Quebec, and Genergy from Sicklerville, New Jersey. Love it. Love to see it. Okay. And one more. Dirty Deck and 420 from Kentucky. Good morning. Good morning. All right. So yeah, we've got a lot of people are having a lot of thoughts about this mistrial, right? And of course, it's I will say that whether you are on the side of the Danny Masterson defense or you're on the side of the prosecution and the alleged victims, on either side, I think a lot of people prefer to see some kind of a resolution, right? Especially after a trial that's taken as much time as this one has. I mean, it started, gosh, did it start in early November or was it October? I think it was actually like October that it started. And then of course there was the break for the week of Thanksgiving. They went into jury deliberations like 2 days before, like at the end of the week prior. And so when they broke for deliberations, they were deadlocked, of course, as we know. And so there were a lot of questions about like what's going to happen over the break. But they basically were deliberating for like 2 days, had the break, came back Monday, Tuesday, and then Wednesday. Then there was a declared mistrial. I've seen deliberations go longer than that. So, some people I think were very surprised by the timing of the mistrial. I was a little bit surprised myself, but maybe it's just because the deliberation days were broken up in the way that they were. But at the end of the day, what happened was the jury came to the court and said, "Hey, we're hopelessly deadlocked here. Like there is no movement on any of these charges, and we cannot come to a conclusion on this." And so, where the court can't really think of any ways that they can, kind of help to move things along and kind of promote discussion. Mistrials happen. They happen. So just for everyone's information to make sure we're all on the same page, there are three counts of forcible rape specifically, not just rape, but forcible rape. And that is, that's an interesting point that I want to get into in just a bit, because there was some talk about some comments that Danny Masterson's attorney, Philip Cohen, made about that going into the trial. Interesting stuff. So I figure it's worth pointing out and kind of talking about some of that stuff. But there were 3 charges of forcible rape against Danny Masterson, against 3 Jane Does. So count 1, they had apparently 2 jurors wanted to vote guilty, 10 wanted to vote not guilty. Count 2, 4 guilty, 8 not guilty. Count 3, 5 guilty, 7 not guilty. So count 3 was by far the one that was kind of closest to the middle. But overall, it looks like the jury was leaning towards acquittal. Even on that last one where it was a bit closer than the others, the numbers do lean towards acquittal. So we'll get into sort of like what all of that kind of means moving forward and all that kind of stuff. But let's first go through an article by the Associated Press to kind of talk about this and see what some of the reporting is on it, and then I'll go through some of like my impressions. I kind of sort of alluded to some of them earlier already, but yeah, we'll kind of go through like the thought process of like, what I was thinking based on what we had seen in this case already so far, and And yeah. So anyway, we'll go through all that. Okay. So here is from the Associated Press. Mistrial after jury deadlock in Danny Masterson rape case. All right. So you can see Danny Masterson with his wife there, walking out of the courthouse. They both look pretty happy there, I'd say. Okay. A judge declared a mistrial Wednesday at the rape trial of That 70s Show actor Danny Masterson after jurors who were leaning strongly toward acquitting him deadlocked following the month-long trial in which the Church of Scientology played a supporting role. I mean, well, I do still kind of disagree though with this this characterization that they were strongly leaning towards acquitting him. I mean, yes, on count one, I would agree with that. Yes, that they were strongly leaning towards acquitting. Even on count two, but on count three, I would disagree with that because it seems like they were a bit more split down the middle on that one. And if they charge on one, he's going to jail, right? Or if they find not guilty on one, he's going to jail, right? Okay, prosecutors said Masterson raped 3 women, including a former girlfriend, in his Hollywood Hills home between 2001 and 2003, and the church dissuaded them from going public for years. Masterson, 46, pleaded not guilty, and his lawyer said the acts were all consensual. I find the jurors hopelessly deadlocked, Judge Charlene Olmedo declared after the jury foreman said there was nothing the court could do to move them closer to reaching a unanimous decision. She set a March date for a retrial in Los Angeles Superior Court. Olmedo had ordered jurors to take Thanksgiving week off and keep deliberating after they said on November 18th that they could not reach a consensus. A jury of 6 women and 6 men began deliberations anew Monday, or alternates replaced 2 jurors who were diagnosed with COVID-19 over the break. Jurors voted 7 times Tuesday and Wednesday without being able to reach consensus on any of the 3 counts, the foreman said. 2 jurors voted for conviction on the first count, 4 voted for conviction on the second count, and 5 voted to convict on the third count. The result was a serious setback for prosecutors and for the 3 women who said they were seeking long overdue justice and provided emotional and graphic testimony over several days. 2 of the alleged victims in the case issued a statement saying they were disappointed Masterson has evaded criminal accountability for his deplorable acts. However, we are collectively resolved to continue our fight for justice. All 3 women were members of the church at the time, and Masterson remains one. 2 of the women and the husband of one are suing Masterson, the Church of Scientology, its leader, David Miscavige, and others for allegedly stalking, harassing, and intimidating them after they sought to expose Masterson. Masterson left court with his wife, actor and model Bijou Phillips, without speaking to reporters. He was accompanied to court many days by members of his showbiz family, as well as his sisters-in-law, actor Mackenzie Phillips and singer and actress China Phillips, and her husband, actor William Baldwin. The proceedings took place amid a flurry of cases on both coasts with hashtag #MeToo connotations, including the Los Angeles trial of Harvey Weinstein just down the hall from Masterson's. In New York, Kevin Spacey won a sexual misconduct lawsuit brought by actor Anthony Rapp in New York, and a jury ordered director and screenwriter Paul Haggis to pay $10 million in a civil case there. But at the Masterson trial, as at the Haggis trial, hashtag #MeToo implications were largely eclipsed by the specter of Scientology, despite the judge's insistence that the church not become a de facto defendant. Deputy District Attorney Reinhold Mueller said that the church had tried to silence the women, and that the reason it took 2 decades for the case, and that was the reason that it took 2 decades for the case to go to trial. Masterson attorney Philip Cohen said the church was mentioned 700 times during trial and argued that it became an excuse for the prosecution's failure to build a believable case against Masterson, a prominent Scientologist. Church spokesperson Karen Powell said Mueller had misrepresented church doctrine and beliefs, and the Jane Does made false allegations about Scientology. There is zero truth to any of the testimony that the church has harassed or stalked the Jane Does, Powell said. Now, that comment probably is having to do with the the civil case that is following this criminal case, right? So for those that have been following, of course, you understand that there are actually two cases here. There's this criminal case that is against Danny Masterson alone, even though Scientology has been talked about quite a bit, because as this article just mentioned, we've got the DA here in this case has been talking about the reasons why these women say that they have not come forward, right? Because it took them a while to come forward to report to the police their allegations against Danny Masterson. On the defense side, that can look a little bit etch a sketch, right? Because we're talking about the Me Too movement. We've got Amber Heard is a great example of someone who has hijacked a movement for her own purposes, and then in court is found to have done so in a dishonest way, right? Other people that have come forward and accused people, that has not been the case, right? One of the examples that I always point to is the women's USA gymnastics team against Larry Nassar. We've got the Weinstein allegations. He's going through his second trial. He's already been convicted once in New York. So anyway, where was I going with this? Sorry, I went down a certain tangent. Okay, but basically what I was going with is we've got this trial here against Masterson, right? Scientology is involved because it was to explain why these women didn't come forward, and to say it's not because of the Me Too movement. It's not because they're trying to sort of like jump on a train that they're not supposed to be on. It's because of Scientology's policies and practices. That is what the prosecution was saying here, and that was the reason why they were bringing Scientology in so much. Now, this particular statement right here about their zero truth about any about them stalking or harassing the Jane Does, that is probably in allusion to the civil case, which has also been brought against Danny Masterson and the Church of Scientology and David Miscavige and I guess a number of other people. We haven't really talked about that case in much detail here, other than to just kind of like mention that case and mention the basic causes of action there, that they basically have alleged that because they came forward as a result of their coming forward and publicly naming Danny Masterson, then they became subject to the practice that is commonly known as fair game, which is where Scientology basically says, if we determine that you are an enemy of Scientology, you have become fair game. So therefore we can do all kinds of crazy things to you. We can harass you, we can stalk you, we can, meddle with your family, maybe kill your pets, all kinds of crazy things. And these are the kind of things that these women have alleged in the complaint, women and one husband. So, anyway, so I think that this statement here is probably alluding a little bit more to the civil case rather than the criminal case, although the women did testify to these kinds of things because they were talking about how if they came forward, they would not only be excommunicated from Scientology, but they would also be completely cut off from everything that they've ever known and loved, because Scientology is such an insular kind of community that when you are a Scientologist, apparently, what I've learned, right? Like I'm not an expert, and never have been. I don't plan to become a Scientology expert, but from what I have learned, when someone is in Scientology, typically they have grown up in it, and so because of that, all of your friends, all of your family, all of the people that you really kind of know and love typically are Scientologists as well. So when you get kicked out, you lose all of that. And there's also a financial component too, because of the way in which Scientology like requires financial payment for going through their auditing process, which is required to kind of go up in the hierarchy of Scientology. So and people really don't get paid a lot of money when they are working for Scientology. So there are all kinds of questionable policies and activities that happen that really kind of at the very least, from an outsider's perspective, they look like they are intended to keep people within a certain like power inferiority position, if that makes any sense. So, okay, anyway, let's continue on with this article though. Cohen said he would file a motion to dismiss the case based on the way the jury voted, which is not a surprise because Philip Cohen has been trying at multiple stages throughout this trial to get this case dismissed, which is his prerogative, of course. He is the defense attorney. He is representing his client, and he needs to uh, be a zealous advocate of his client, and that includes, trying to get it dismissed at whatever strategic opportunity is available. Let's see here. He said jurors provided additional insights after the mistrial ruling that were helpful, but wouldn't discuss what they told him. That's interesting. I mean, helpful can mean a lot of things to a lot of people, obviously. But it would be nice to know the details of what he's talking about, but he's not required to disclose it, I guess. You always wonder as a lawyer if what you're doing in court every day is making any inroads with the jury, Cohen said. Clearly, we made inroads. The district attorney's office said in a statement that it was disappointed with the outcome and would consider its next steps. It thanked the women for bravely stepping forward and recounting their harrowing experiences. Jurors were escorted out of the courthouse without speaking with reporters. Masterson did not testify. Cohen presented no defense testimony and instead focused on inconsistencies in the accounts of the three accusers, who he said changed their stories over time and spoke with each other before going to police. The key to this case is not when they reported it, Cohen said during closing arguments. It's what they said when they reported it, what they said after they reported it, and what they said at trial. Mueller argued that Masterson was a man for whom no never meant no. Two women said they were served drinks by Masterson and became woozy or passed out before being violently raped. One said she thought she would die as Masterson held a pillow over her face. Ugh, that is... I didn't anticipate we were going to be getting into these kind of details, so now is a little bit late. I apologize. I usually try to get these in before we get into any kind of details in the testimony in these kinds of cases, but trigger warning. So I know that there are a lot of people that watch this channel, that follow this channel, the content on this channel that have a history of being DV victims, IPV victims. So yeah, I apologize for not getting the trigger warning out there sooner. But if any of this is ever triggering for you, take a step away from the computer or from your phone or what have you. It is not worth it, right? Like, your mental health is absolutely most worth it. Okay. Anyway, continuing on with this. An ex-girlfriend said she awoke to finding Masterson having sex with her without her consent. The defense said her claims were undermined because she later had sex with him after they broke up. Which, I mean, this has all kinds of issues here, right? Because consent is a very fact-based sort of thing, right? You can give consent at one point and then you can revoke consent at another point, right? Just because you have consented in the past doesn't mean that this next time is consensual, right? That's the basic logic underlying here, let me do this. That's the basic logic underlying the rape shield laws, right? So it used to be the case that defense attorneys in these kinds of cases could point to a woman's sexual history, basically, and to say like, oh, she's super loose, she's a floozy. And so therefore to say like, well, she wanted it on this occasion and this occasion and this occasion with this person, with this person, with this person, to say, therefore, she probably wanted it on this case too, and with this person. So that's not permissible anymore. You're not allowed to do that because it's not a credible way of going about these kinds of cases, right? Because consent, like I said, can be given, it can be taken away. Someone cannot consent at one point and then consent later on at another point. Of course, it does call into question why someone would go back to that person afterwards. I'm not saying that that is my personal opinion, but that is something that juries will think about, right? Even though there was there have been experts that have testified in this case and in the Weinstein case, because they're both going on at the same time. Sometimes for me, when it comes to some of the testimony, I start to mix the two up because they're going on at the same time and literally in the same courthouse. But there was an expert that I think it was in this case that testified saying it's not uncommon for someone who is a victim of rape, of IPV, of this kind of thing that has where the aggressor is their partner, for them to go back to that person afterwards. Part of it is because of feelings of shame. Part of it is because of feelings of like them being damaged goods. Um, that's something that very much can happen and is relatively more common than people would expect when it comes to these kinds of cases. But at the end of the day, the jury still has to grapple with that. The jury has to buy what that expert is telling them in order for them to accept that, right? Like you can have an expert come in and testify to all that stuff, and it can make logical sense to you or me, and the jury might be sitting there in the courtroom and saying, "You're a hired gun. You could be here saying just about anything for all I know or care, and I don't really care for what you're telling me. I don't really buy what it is that you're selling." So there's always that possibility that as we're reading these sort of articles about the testimony from these experts or really any witness here, that 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 we can read it and say like, okay, like that makes sense to me. And the juror that's actually sitting in the courtroom that's evaluating that witness in person could be sitting there and saying, "No, I think you're kind of etch a sketch." Like I don't want to listen to what you're saying. Okay. So anyway, I have issues with this in the defense, but again, this is a defense attorney that is doing his job by defending his client. Cohen told jurors that they could acquit Masterson if they thought he actually and reasonably believed the woman consented to having sex. Mueller countered that nobody would believe the acts described were consensual, reminding jurors that one woman repeatedly told him no, pulled his hair, and tried to get out from under him. Mueller told jurors not to be swayed by defense speculation and said contradictions in the victim's testimony were signs of authenticity as opposed to accounts that had been scripted. And that was another thing, that they had expert testimony in this particular case, where the expert said, yeah, you can have some inconsistencies in the testimony, because that, like as it says here, as he said in his closing argument, that that is a sign that someone has actually lived through it. It's something that's actually in their brain, like a normal memory, and it's not just something that they made up and just sort of hammered in synthetically, I could say. Contrast that to Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard, right? When Amber Heard was testifying, there were some parts of her testimony that felt like they had been rehearsed because they just were oddly scripted. They came off as oddly scripted. Like the part where she goes like, "Yeah, we went to the island and he was drinking a lot of tea." Like a lot of tea. And it was just the way that came off. And I think if folks that have been that were following that case for years and years and followed the deposition testimony, let me know in the chat if you remember this or not. I can't remember personally, but I think that she had also testified to that in her deposition also. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was the case. Because I think I remember someone telling me about that around that time, saying like that was like exactly how she had said it before. Because the thing is, like when someone is giving rehearsed testimony, okay, yeah, she did mention the tea in the depot. Yeah. So when someone is giving something that is rehearsed, a jury can really tell. So when there are slight differences in the way you tell it, it's like, if you had some big event that happened to you 2 weeks ago. And then you've got friends that are asking you about it. You've got family members that are asking you about it. You've got, like other colleagues that are asking you about it. You might tell them in slightly different ways how things happen, just because, I mean, after you've told the same story a couple times, it starts to get a little bit repetitive, right? Who wants to say the exact same words every single time, right? It's just the way that we talk. It's the way that our brains are wired. So this testimony by that expert basically was there to show that, look, you can have some inconsistencies so long as they are minor. They're not like the bigger details of what happened, right? It's the things around the edges that maybe get a little bit blurred here or there. Like, I don't know, like, was her hair in a braid or a ponytail? Like things, details like that maybe wouldn't matter so much, um, but that are still details, right? Okay. Um, The charges date to a period when Masterson was at the height of his fame, starring from 1998 until 2006 as Stephen Hyde on Fox's That 70s Show. The show made stars of Ashton Kutcher, Mila Kunis, and Topher Grace, and is getting an upcoming Netflix reboot with That 90s Show. Masterson had reunited, and by the way, that 90s show is, I mean, I don't think you guys need me to inform you on this, but that 90s show is not supposed to be starring Danny Masterson. It's going to have, I think it's supposed to have like everyone but him on the show. So it'll be interesting to see how they sort of write that in. Maybe may not be that difficult of a write in, but anyway, it was an interesting wrinkle to see that they were already planning on him not being a part of it even before the results of this trial, which is how things typically shake out in Hollywood. Masterson had reunited with Kutcher on the Netflix comedy The Ranch, but was written off the show when an LAPD investigation was revealed in December 2017. Okay, so that is it. It's always weird when they abruptly end these these articles here like this. Okay. So yeah, so this is it's interesting. It's interesting the way that this all shook out. And as it says here, there is um there's a new trial that is scheduled for March 27th, 2023. Deputy DA Mueller has said that they are evaluating what they're going to do. But let's first talk about my own impressions of this case as we had watched it kind of unfold. Actually, before we do that first, let's see these super chats here. Shibaka Wookie, thanks so much for your super chat. Says, I have a fundamental problem with the message this sends to drugged victims. You weren't awake, nothing happened. It's disgusting and awful. It's disturbing. I'm actually going to save this super chat because I'm going to talk about that in just a little bit. It has to do with the comments that Philip Cohen had made. Nicholas Darrow, Labor Law Santa, thanks so much for your super chat. It says, if Scientology was labeled a cult and not a tax exempt church, would their testimony and the time it took to report have a stronger impact? I don't know. I don't know. I don't think so, because I think that the labeling of Scientology as a church versus a cult arguably is something that is probably going to make it more prejudicial than probative, right? So like the distinction of whether this is a church or whether this is a cult, uh, to some could be seen as a bit more of of an opinion matter. And I don't know. I mean, basically, I don't think that would necessarily have a stronger impact, because you could say, like, let's say the Catholic Church as an example. As a Catholic, I feel comfortable invoking that one, right? Um, so let's say there was an allegation about somebody trying to speak out, about some issue, but they were being prevented by the Catholic Church. I don't think that you would have trouble finding people that would see that as just as despicable as if it were coming from some cult, right? Now, of course, There are people out there that will say every religion is a cult. I'm not one of those. But, even within the framework of like, something that by and large we would probably agree this is an actual church, this is a particular faith, a faith group, and not so much a cult. Even within that, I think that you can find people that would understand the dynamics, sociological dynamics, power dynamics, administrative dynamics, within that, to be able to accept that kind of reasoning for why someone wouldn't speak out. Um, because I think it has more to do with power structures than with whether there's a bona fide religion that's involved, if that makes any sense. Um, okay. So, all right. So my impressions on this case. First off, it's hard, of course, to give very strong opinions on a particular case when we're watching as such outsiders, right? When we're live streaming it, we are seeing the play by play. We're seeing every single ball and strike that's happening, right? And we're talking about it as it's happening. It is much easier to develop an opinion on a case like that when you are seeing everything that's happening, that's unfolding in front of the jury themselves, rather than getting it through various filters, whether they are filters that we um feel like we can rely on because they are reliable, or they're some of the more egregious MSM kind of characters, right? Like when we are getting it through another filter, inevitably we are getting it through someone else's impressions and the things that they are focusing on, and the things that they notice that they don't notice could be different from what we might see ourselves just by watching it ourselves, right? So there's I always try to caveat that, and I try to remember to bring that up when we're talking about these kinds of things, because it makes it more difficult whenever we are giving our impression on these kinds of things. With all of that said, I did think that there probably was going to be one guilty verdict, maybe two. I was a little hesitant about a third one because there were some inconsistencies that were maybe gonna trip some people up. Um, but again, we can't, like, this is me formulating an opinion without actually viewing the witness's testimony myself, whether I feel like they're credible based on watching them testify, their body language, the way that they actively respond under pressure of cross-examination. It can be difficult, right? So one of the things about this case that is difficult, just like with the other Me Too cases that we're talking about right now, that we have been talking about in the last couple months, is the passage of time. This is a theme that has kind of come up time and again, in these kinds of cases, is because we're talking about allegations that are they've aged a bit, whether they've aged like fine wine or like some bad cheese is up to interpretation, I suppose. But we can use as an example the Anthony Rapp versus Kevin Spacey case, right? Like that one was one that was another case where it was decades old. And actually that one was probably the oldest case in terms of allegations out of any of the ones that we've been talking about, right? Because we've got Weinstein, where the allegations are around 2016, 2015, 2017, somewhere around there. We've got the Masterson case where they're between 2001, 2003. Anthony Rapp was like 1986. Like that is a really, really difficult case to bring forward, and for a jury to look at that plaintiff and to say, yeah, this is timely. Like we're gonna award you damages, or we're going to, put this person in jail, whether it's civil or criminal. Um, and part of that is because, with the passage of time, you've got issues like, you've got memory of the witnesses. You can have issues there. Memory fades over time. People reframe their experiences oftentimes, especially if they tend to be traumatic. Like if there was trauma involved in a particular instance, the question of those sort of details can become a bit gray over time, right? Like the example that I love to give is talking about like, where were you on when you found out about 9/11? Like, how sure are you about your interactions with other people? Like in that time period, like that hour, those several hours, that day, what did you do throughout that day? Things like that. Whether you were in New York or not, by the way, that kind of stuff can shift in some wild ways, because that is a traumatic event for a lot of people. Now, where it comes to an allegation like SA, IPV, this kind of stuff, um, that arguably can be even more flimsy over time because of the way in which the brain tries to protect itself, right? Like our bodies build up calluses when we lift weights, right? And that's because it's our body is trying to protect itself from the pressures of, like the weights that you're lifting. It's the same thing that happens with our memories and with our brains when we go through traumatic experiences. Um so um and another issue is that evidence can go missing. It can make it harder to prove a case because you might have witnesses who have passed away or phone records that have just like been wiped out, right? Or other kinds of records. All kinds of things can happen when it comes to evidence. And the impression on the jury might be not favorable to the plaintiff or to the prosecution because they might be saying like, okay, like at this point, kind of who cares? I'm not saying that is an opinion that I have, but there are people out there that could be looking at a case like this and be saying, like, if this was such a case, why wasn't it brought so long ago? Like, why is this just now being brought? How strong of a case is this really? If it's just been sort of brought in recent years. Now, in this particular case, in the Masterson case, that was one of the things that the prosecution was painstakingly trying to overcome in terms of why they brought up Scientology so much, is saying this is why we didn't bring this case before. Sorry, Andy's barking at Mr. Bites. I don't know why. But that was why the prosecution brought up Scientology so much, right? Was because they had that need to explain why these charges were brought so late, why these women came out so late. And I do think that they did a decent job of that. At least for my purposes, it seemed like it was a very reasonable explanation to say, okay, they were living in a very, very specific community, very insular kind of community. And it's one which has, to a certain extent, it can really assert a lot of power and control over someone. And there's a lot of ways in which you can find a lot of corruption. There are all kinds of ways that I think that most of us can look at this situation like what these women were allegedly, arguably within Scientology, and to say like, okay, if I put myself in their shoes, I can understand why they would feel like they can't come forward, because there's all of the normal dynamics of someone coming forward in a normal IPV case, a normal SA case. And then on top of that, you've got the power structures and dynamics of Scientology and the ways in which people can definitely be held in a certain specific place. I'm not saying that specifically is happening, but I'm just saying as a hypothetical, I can understand that. So, but, like I said, we also were not there to witness the witnesses, right? To be able to evaluate the witnesses like the jury was able to. And so it could very well be that there were jurors who watched the testimony given by the Jane Does and said, I'm sorry, I just don't believe you. That is a perfectly legitimate reason for someone to not want to convict someone, right? Like that is the reason for someone to not want to convict someone. Because at the end of the day, the prosecution the prosecution, has the burden of proof here. They have to prove beyond reasonable doubt. If there's any amount of reasonable doubt in any of these charges, it's appropriate for the jury to acquit. Um, so in terms of the jurors that decided that they were not going to convict, that they were just not moving on their not guilty stance, I know that there are people uh that are their reaction is, are they pro Scientologist? Are they, are they like big fans of that 70s show? Like, what's going on here? I would, before we go down that particular route, I would caution against that line of thinking, because I really do think that when you have a jury that is actually seated, and especially a jury where this takes up as much of their everyday lives as this case did, I think we need to be mindful of the likelihood that realistically they want to do their job. Like, that usually is the case in these kinds of cases, right? In any kind of a jury case, jurors want to go home feeling like their time in court has been well spent. Um, Not everyone, of course. There are people on that make it onto juries that just aren't exactly um I don't know, like justice minded necessarily. You can get all types of people on a jury, but I do think that by and large, I call me naive, right? But I do think that there are more often than not people that just want to do the right job once they are seated as a jury. Um there's also the question of, I know that this was kind of a rumor that was kind of passing around. People were asking about, well, what about Scientology buying off some jurors, either in the jury pool level or specific jurors that are actually seated? I haven't seen, I've seen people questioning that on social media. I haven't seen anybody actually coming forward with any kind of evidence for that. So again, I would caution against making those kinds of assertions or allegations, right? I more likely than not, what we had here was a case where you had some people that just decided, yeah, he's guilty of sin, and other people that said, no, no, the state needs more in order to prove this case against this guy. Which also reminds me of the point that was very surprising to me going into jury deliberations, that there were no witnesses that testified for the defense. Um, I remember I had a whole video on this where I was just completely like mind blown about it, and I was like, how can this happen, right? Like, who's actually driving this train, right? Like, is Scientology driving this train here? What's going on? Um, and and I did say in that video, it could very well be that this is just a defense strategy. It could be that they figure that the prosecution didn't have enough in evidence to convict. And so, if they were to put Danny Masterson on the stand, well, first off, there's that issue, right? He invoked his Fifth Amendment rights and decided not to testify. Um, not surprising at all, because that's common in these kinds of cases. You're not supposed to take that as, some sort of an admission of guilt or fear of guilt or something like that. But it was a question of the fact that they didn't put on any other witnesses, which is it's a bold move, in my opinion. It's definitely a show of confidence. So it could very well be that they made a determination that, when the chips fell where they fell in terms of the prosecution's case, that the defense just said, you know what, they haven't proven their burden, and so we don't need to put anybody on there, and if we don't, we look even stronger for it. So it could, honestly, it could very well be that was just strategy, and that it actually ended up working out, right? Because that's another thing that we've often talked about in these kinds of cases, right? Is when we are surprised by a particular strategic decision by one team or another in trial, um, you know, eh, it's not always the case that that we're right in our surprise. And at the same time, technically, if it ends up working out for that side, it was the right decision to make. So, so, you know, okay. So that's that. Now on to the question about the comments by defense attorney Philip Cohen. Okay, so if you're not familiar, he apparently a couple days before trial started, he was in court and hearing, and I guess he said in open court something along the lines. Now I'm paraphrasing right here, but it was like something along the lines of, um, "This is the case of forcible rape, and if Danny Masterson had just done things more cleanly, done things more properly, and they were fully unconscious, then we wouldn't even be here. We wouldn't even have this trial to begin with." Something along those lines. Now, forgive me if I'm mischaracterizing that. I'm trying to do my best to remember exactly what the statements were. Um, but the overall impression was that essentially because because there was some alleged force involved, if there hadn't been, right, if he had just uh, intoxicated them to the point that they were just fully unconscious, that there wouldn't be a trial. Now, there was a lot of emotional reaction to that, and I completely understand that, right? It's those kind of comments feel absolutely outrageous. Um and I think Aaron Morgan, I think you're referring to what I'm talking about right now, right? That the comments in front in the hearing, right? There was no jury. So that was not an issue for the jury to hear, but people were still reacting to it, right? And people still have people have a right to have their emotional reaction, to those kinds of comments, right? Because nevertheless, those can make it out to the public, those can make it out to the press. And so people, in terms of like publicity, when people hear that coming from a lawyer in open court, it's people can be troubled by the kind of message that it sends. And I think that that's probably what Chewbacca Wookie was referring to in the super chat, saying, "I have a fundamental problem with the message it sends to drug victims. You weren't awake, nothing happened. It's disgusting and awful. It's disturbing." And so what I wanted to do was to point out that under California law, it is not the case that only forcible rape is rape. Let me share my screen again with you guys. But I'm going to share with you the California Penal Code. Okay. Woo, okay, that looks like teeny tiny text. Let's see if I can zoom in at least a little bit here. Ooh. Okay, I hope you guys can read that. Okay. So, this is the portion of the penal code that talks about rape, abduction, abuse of children. Okay, anyway, so section 261 here talks about rape. What Danny Masterson, what Danny Masterson was charged with was forcible rape. So that was okay. So 261A2 right here. So rape is an act of sexual intercourse accomplished under any of the following circumstances, says part A. 2 says if it is accomplished against a person's will by means of force, violence, duress, menace, or fear of immediate and unlawful bodily injury on the person or another. So that is what he was charged with. That is not the only definition of rape here, as you can see. So, there's also, where somebody has a developmental or physical disability, and cannot give legal consent. This is talking about somebody who is not the spouse of the person. That's, I think, the one situation where whether someone is a spouse or is not a spouse it's even relevant. But we've also got the definition here of if a person is prevented from resisting by an intoxicating or anesthetic substance or controlled substance, and this condition was known or reasonably should have been known by the accused. So in other words, if there is an allegation that Danny Masterson drugged them or boozed him up, and that he therefore, then took away their ability to consent, right? Because they were so far gone that they were not able to consent. I don't know why the charges were under forcible rape if this was an opportunity here. And this is something that I personally was kind of wondering, and maybe I'll ask around and I'll get some answers. But there's also more to the point for that one Jane Doe 3 incident. And I guess I probably should have done this before. Let me backtrack here. So we had Jane Doe 1, Jane Doe 2, and Jane Doe 3. Jane Doe 3, there were two incidents that came up, right? There was a charged incident and there was a non-charged incident. In other words, there were two incidents where it was alleged that Danny Masterson had sex with her without her consent. One of those times was through force. All of the charges, as I said, were charges of rape through force, forcible rape. So there was this other incident that the Jane Doe 3 says happened that didn't involve force, because she says that she was asleep. She was asleep and then she woke up to him doing his thing. And so she says that she didn't consent because she was asleep. This is another, as you can see right here, this is another definition here, is part 4. If a person is at the time unconscious of the nature of the act, and this is known to the accused. In other words, if there's testimony, if there's evidence that he knew what he was doing, he knew that she was asleep and she was asleep, then it fits into this category. As used in this paragraph, unconscious of the nature of the act means incapable of resisting because the victim meets any one of the following conditions. A, was unconscious or asleep. B, was not aware, knowing, perceiving, or cognizant that the act occurred. C, was not aware, knowing, perceiving, or cognizant of the essential characteristics of the act due to the perpetrator's fraud in fact. D, was not aware, knowing, perceiving, or cognizant of the essential characteristics of the act due to the perpetrator's fraudulent representation that the sexual penetration served a professional purpose when it served no professional purpose. So, okay. So yeah, and then there are others, but basically, I wanted to point this out because I think that the comments by the defense attorney, Philip Cohen, I think that alerted a lot of people and put them under the impression that the only type of legal definition of rape in California is forcible rape. But I think that is just what the prosecution decided to charge him with. And so therefore, any other instances that the alleged victims claimed against Danny Masterson that didn't fall into the category of forcible rape did not fall into the specific charges in this particular case. So, so that's why there was that discrepancy between those two incidents for Jane Doe 3, right? Because you've got the one where she alleges that she was even like pulling his hair to try to get him off of her, like very violent sort of allegations there. And then there's the one where she says that she was asleep and she woke up to him, doing stuff. So, so yeah. Okay. That was the only thing with that. So now what exactly does this mean, right? What does a mistrial mean? It doesn't mean that he's guilty, obviously. It also does not mean that he's been acquitted. He still has been charged. The court has set the new trial date, and the prosecution has to determine what they're going to do. The prosecution can decide not to not to move forward with these charges, not to try the case again. There are all kinds of factors that can go into that, right? Part of it is hopefully their first thought is about the alleged victims, right? Putting them on the stand is arguably assuming that what they allege is true, right? I'm going through this as um looking at this from the prosecution's perspective, right? The prosecution believes that the allegations are true. That's why they move forward with it. So if I'm the prosecutor and I believe that all of the allegations are true, these are women who have been through some very traumatic experiences, and every time they are forced to not just talk about it, but talk about it in this kind of an environment is also traumatic, right? It's reopening all of those wounds by forcing them to examine the details, but also doing it in an adversarial context where they are put under cross examination by the other side. They're put in the hot seat. They've got strangers, a courtroom filled with strangers, whether they are jurors, whether it's the judge, whether it's the reporters and the public, members of the public that can come in and see this trial. That's a lot of people coming in to examine your personal business. First off, and second off, when they are digging in there to investigate whether or not you're telling the truth, that is a very difficult experience to go through. So the prosecution has to go into, is it worth it to put these women through this whole situation, through this whole experience yet again, um, with more at least hypothetical opportunities for them to testify with inconsistencies. That's also another potential risk. Um, but there's that. There's also, you know, the feedback that they get from the jury. The first bit of feedback is the jury split. On count one, it was 10-2. 10 not guilty, 2 guilty. That is a very widespread. The others, they get uh a little bit closer as you go down the list, because count 2, it was 8-4, and then count 3, it was 7-5. These are uh they're still, even with count 3, it's still the jury leaning towards acquittal. So the prosecution has to look at that and determine, is this something that we want to, move forward with? That we think that the resources that get expended at by being at trial, is it worthwhile for the state's expenses, to put on this trial again, if we think that they're likely to head towards acquittal. On the other hand, they also are able to talk to the jurors themselves, to poll the jurors, to figure out what kind of arguments landed for them and what didn't. What sort of factual points made it to the jury and what went over their heads. We talk about this all the time when we are live streaming these trials, that when someone is testifying, jury might not be paying attention, right? And if the jury is put to sleep, sorry, not to sleep, asleep. Woo, sorry. If the jury is asleep at the time that somebody is testifying, figuratively, not literally. If they're literally asleep, the judge will either remove them and put an alternate in, or they'll make everybody get up for a break. But if somebody is not paying attention, if jury is not paying attention during testimony, um it's like that old adage about the tree falling in the woods, right? If a tree falls in the woods and there's no one there to hear it, does it actually make a sound? If you get some awesome testimony out of a witness, but the jury's not paying attention, is it really in evidence? I don't know. So, there could be bits of information that the prosecution gets from the jury, where they evaluate, or they find out through their evaluation. Well, we had this great evidence that came out of, this testimony that came out of this particular witness, but nobody seemed to notice it. Why is that? Is that because of the way that we structured our questions? Is it because of the way that we sort of like fixed our narrative, that we, established our framework? All kinds of different things can come into play there, right? Starting with the way that they set up their theme in their opening statements. So the prosecution has an opportunity now also to kind of go back to brass tacks and figure out, where did we go wrong and what can we do here to get that justice that we are seeking, because ideally the prosecution seeks justice and not convictions, right? Even if that means that they truly believe that they are, a conviction is the justice that they are seeking. Um, but anyway, the ultimate goal for them would be, to see if the jury is going to convict. Um, so anyway, all of that is to say that the prosecution can then go back and say, hey, look, this is what we did before. This is what landed with the jury. This is what didn't land with the jury. This is what we can do differently if we decide to do this again. So they can reevaluate and come at it anew. At the same time, the defense can do the same thing, right? Because as Philip Cohen was quoted in that AP article, he said, hey, we talked to some jurors and what we found was very helpful. So the defense can also do the same thing here, right? To say like, okay, these are the points that worked well. These are the points that didn't work so well. This is what we can do differently next time. So anyway, all of that is to say that there is a new trial date on the calendar, March of 2023. We'll see if it actually ends up happening. Tony Ortega, massive shout out to him once again, because his daily coverage from inside the courtroom was so crucial to getting our understanding of what was actually happening, because otherwise reporting is not necessarily all that reliable on a consistent basis. And his daily well uh periodically, I would say, like throughout the day, he would come out with his Substack like transcripts from the hearings, but he would also have daily videos to sort of give summaries of things. He had some really, really good stuff that came out of the courtroom, and it was very, very helpful to be able to follow along with what he was doing there. He's said that if there is a second trial, he's going back. He's going to be back in the courtroom once again for that. But yeah, so we'll see. We'll see where that goes. And what can we expect moving forward now at this point? Like I said, we've got the trial date. We'll see. We'll see. We'll see if they decide to charge. And if they do, I mean, not charge, if they decide to retry and move forward with charges again, or if they decide to let it go, in which case Danny Masterson doesn't go to jail. But from his perspective, he also doesn't exactly get an acquittal either. So in terms of his career, I don't know. It would take a stronger hit for him, even if this ends in mistrial and doesn't get retried. So yeah. Anyway, let me get some super chats here. Oh, well, actually, Mew Mew 0203 became a YouTube member. Welcome to Bike Club. Welcome to Bike Club. I hope you enjoy being here. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. And I hope you're able to join us tomorrow for our members exclusive live stream, super casual hangout. We don't even really talk about law, to be honest. We just kind of hang out, talk about all kinds of other stuff, and very casually. So I hope you can join us. And once again, thanks so much for supporting the channel. It really is helpful. Sandra Ramirez, thanks so much for your super chat. Says, can the prosecution include lesser charges on retrial to increase the probability of conviction? So, I mean, as a general matter, the prosecution can include lesser charges. In terms of how that works on a retrial, I actually don't know, because I've never done, I've never been I've never worked on the prosecution side. So I actually don't know. I've never encountered that issue myself, but I will definitely look it up to see what can be done. The thing that could potentially become a hurdle to that is, is statute of limitations, which I know is likely an issue here, because like I said, the charges are from, or the allegations are from many, many years ago. So adding adding some charges to that, I don't know. Yeah, I'm I'm not entirely certain. But thanks for your super chat. So, all right. That for me, think I think that about does it. But I know that a lot of people were very surprised. A lot of people were disappointed. But I think that people come at this, I think, from two different perspectives, right? And neither perspective is particularly right or wrong, right? So you've got the side of people that are looking at this through the lens of like Scientology is very much involved here, and I don't trust anyone within that specter, right? And then you've got the other people here that are saying, yeah, okay, but the prosecution still has to prove their case beyond reasonable doubt, right? And obviously, either side can recognize the other, right? But in terms of like how I've seen people reacting on social media, we've got uh mostly people that are saying like I don't necessarily want to support the prosecution here because we're talking about a very, very old series of allegations, and how well can they prove that in the first place? Um, because in order to convict anyone, we want to make sure that there is enough evidence to convict. Um, but on the other side, on the other side, you've got people that are talking about this as largely as a Scientology case, and protecting people that they say are, surly questions. Um, and I do see in the chat questions about the Weinstein case. I I hadn't prepared an update on Weinstein today because I wanted to just kind of focus on Danny Masterson. Um, but I know that there's been some more testimony in it. I will be doing another update on that one soon, but it's been that one has been not as noticeable lately. But anyway, yeah, uh no update on that. But yes, A Capitan, House and Habit is going to the Weinstein trial. Yes. So she's been in the courthouse, and she actually was kind of like bouncing around back and forth between the two trials in the last few days, I think. But uh yeah. So I definitely follow her on Substack and on Instagram. In her Instagram stories, she posts so many different updates on everything, like in such a great way. She's been talking about that. She's been talking about the Balenciaga gate with their ad campaign that had the BDSM teddy bears and like toddlers that were in their photos. It was terrible, terrible stuff. I might have a video on that coming out soon, but I've been digging into that, and that's one of those rabbit holes that's like I found myself continuing to dig deeper and deeper, and I'm like, at some point I probably should have some kind of content on this if I'm spending this much time on it. But oh, and also there's also an update on Kevin Spacey's new accusers. Oh, I don't know anything about that. I hadn't seen that, but thank you for bringing that up to me. I will definitely check into that as well because that is very interesting as well. Um, so all right. Okay. That is it for me. I know that this is a little bit of a shorter live stream than what I've been doing, but I hopefully all that means is that this is just less of a time investment for you. But I hope that this has been enjoyable. I don't know if that's the right word because of the subject matter that we're talking about, but hopefully at least, interesting or informative. And yeah, if you haven't done so already, like the video. It does help to sort of push the video out, by the algorithm. And yeah, subscribe to the channel if you want more content like this. If you haven't done so already. Okay. Other than that, I will see you guys